In this video, we're going to be going into more detail on the upgrades we've already installed to the GT4. We're also going to be going into a few of the questions that you've raised in the comments on some of our previous videos. Today we're at Donington Park with RMA Track Days on their Porsche only track day event. Rather than use this day to bolt another upgrade to the car, we thought we'd use it to go back through the comments in the videos and answer directly some of the questions you've raised over our previous videos. It's also forecast to rain quite heavily today, and one of the questions that has come up a few times is, will this setup, which is very good in the dry and optimised for that, will it still work in the wet? So we're going to put a Pro in the car today when the heavens do open, and we're going to see just how well this car does perform out in the rain. So getting straight into it, we're going to start with our tyre selection. So when we got this GT4, it came with Michelin PS4S tyres, which are a fantastic road tyre. We're going to be spending most of our time out on track in this car though, so straight away, off the bat, we opted for the Michelin Cup 2 tyre, which is a very popular choice for a lot of Porsches out on track. In comparison to the PS4S, the Cup 2 has a lot more grip than the PS4S tyre, especially in the dry. However, in the wet weather, the PS4S does have the edge over the Cup 2, and it also works at colder temperatures much better as well. So if this is more of just a road use car, we would have stayed with the PS4S tyre. But with it being the track focus tyre, we want to have that grip. We want to have the ability to push even harder with the chassis and not have the tyre give in first. So in order to develop the chassis to the most maximum that we could and keep following the grip, we had to move to the Cup 2 tyre. Keeping in mind, this car is still driven to and from tracks. We don't trailer this car, so it's still used on the road. Even though we're going for a track focus setup, it is still heavily used on the road. So the Cup 2 tyre is the perfect balance between using the car out on the roads and being safe and drivable in the wet weather, but also being phenomenal when used out on track. One of the frequently asked questions we were getting in the comments is, what tyre pressures are you running on the Cayman? So we are running between 30 to 33 psi hot pressure, so the hot pressure is key there. So that means we're going out on track, we're getting the temperatures up in the tyres in the initial runs, we're pulling back into the pits, and then we're very quickly getting the tyre pressure gauge on the tyre, and we're dropping those pressures down to between 30 and 33 psi front to rear. The way we decide on between 30 to 33 is we tend to run the rear in this car 1 psi higher than the front for the distribution, and it also depends on how hot the day is. So if we're on a very hot, sticky day, we'll lower them down to about 30, because that means out on track they'll actually get up a little bit more to like 31, 32. If it's a bit of a cooler day but it's still nice and dry, then we'll be going more like 32 and 33 hot pressure PSI. It's worth noting when you're doing this on track though, at the end of the day, you do need to let your tyres cool back down to road driving pressures, and make sure you pump them back up to factory specs before heading out on the road, because otherwise, when they cool fully, you'll be in the low 20s to mid 20s, which is a little bit too low for road driving. So do make sure you reset your pressures after your track day as well. We've been using the additional camber adjustment in our top mounts to get the settings for this Porsche perfect using our tyre temperature sensors and the professional driver's feedback who've been driving this car for us on track. We're going to be going into more detail in future videos on how you arrive at the numbers that work for you. So we have a lot of comments asking for the exact settings on the car. So one way of getting those settings is we supply those to customers. When you buy products from us, we'll supply the customers with the settings to work with the car. But we do ask for what tyres you're running, what the intended use of the car is on track or on the road, so we can tailor those settings based on how you want the car to behave and what your use of the car is and the hardware that's bolted to it. So we're going to go into more detail in the future on what we're looking for in the chassis and how you arrive at those numbers yourself if you wish as well, and the best ways of tuning the car to get optimum camber settings. This is because a lot of our work is done on track days, not test days, so we don't always get a perfectly clear lap. So when we're looking to overlay data and see side by side, it's not always as easy to say a faster lap time, for example. Because we've got traffic on these laps, we have to take that into account. Whereas with the VBOX data, it automatically overlays corner by corner based on the GPS. So we can analyze corner by corner, difference in speeds, so we can take out the clean corners from each lap and overlay those to see the actual differences. So you'll see as well on the videos, we do actually get faster lap times with the parts fitted compared to before, or with the upgrades applied. However, we can't rely on that as such as a figure, because there's so much traffic on these tracks. We could go even faster, and also the base lap could have been potentially faster too. So that's why we're not giving you exact lap time data, because it's not wholly accurate when you compare it to where we're doing it on these track days. So we're using the video VBOX HD2 to overlay corner by corner to analyze the data based on an exact scenario and an exact positioning on track, so we can see an exact side-by-side reference point. So one thing a lot of you have been asking for is even more data as well, and that is something that the VBOX can provide. We've not gone into those tools just yet, because we've been focusing on bringing you the overlays with the tyre temperature sensors and the driver feedback to give as much information as we can, but we will be taking a deeper dive at a later date into all the data collected from those days as well, in terms of overlays of braking points, G's pulled, cornering velocities. So there is an awful lot of data to pull through as well that we can bring your way. I'm here now with Gary Marsh from A Need for Speed Racing, a professional driver coach, and with a lot of experience in Porsche chassis, including the Carrera Cup cars. And you've also got a lot of experience with the Porsche Silverstone Centre as one of the professionals there, and a lot of Formula experience in your past as well, from Formula 3 as well. So we've got Gary in the car today, a different driver today. So we've had Chris and Leighton in previous videos, but it's really nice to keep getting different opinions from different professionals. So we've put Gary in today with a lot of Porsche experience behind him to see what he thinks. So obviously you've been out in the wet on effectively the dry setup on the Cup 2s as well. Yeah. So what's your immediate feedback from how this is in the wet?
Well, I'm very pleasantly surprised. Donington's renowned to be greasy when it's wet. Yeah. Not just wet, but an additional greasiness, which finds any car out really if there's not a good balance. Yeah. This car's got a lovely front to rear balance. It's very predictable. Yeah. And you can put some consistent laps in with it, even though it's very wet, quite cold today. Yeah. And you know, we're not on an ideal tyre, but considering the setup of the car, I was expecting it to be a real handful. Yeah. It's actually quite benign. It lets you know what it's doing, and we were pulling in some other cars that should have been quicker than us. Yeah, I mean, I've been out with you as well after you did your laps on for the data, and it was impressive to see, like, we were getting on the 9923 RSs with all the aero, much wider tyres, and we were still outbraking them. I mean, there will be a driver thing there as well, but that was really interesting, because I thought with the settings we've got in this car, it is optimised for dry, ultimately, but it was interesting how much grip it did still have. We've not yet seen the data as we're talking now, but we will have done in the video by now. So I'm really interested to have a look at the data as well and see how the tyres have been working, because we did get heat in them, didn't we? Yeah, I came in twice to equalise the pressures. I was surprised how much we were seeing an increase in tyre pressures. Yeah. We've let air out twice, and those final laps, there was clearly heat in the tyres, heat in the brakes. Car's very drivable. Having driven a lot of cars over the years, and particularly a Porsche specialist, this car not being a PDK, the gearing's a little bit strange for Donington. Yeah, definitely. So you've got to decide whether you're going to drive on peak power through a corner or on torque. Yeah. Sometimes you don't want to overwhelm the rear of the car with torque when there's limited traction. Sure. Obviously with PDK you'd have more intermediate gears. Yeah. So factoring that in, I was pleasantly surprised how good it is. What I did find really interesting, and this is where your driving experience showed, is when you went offline. So when we were out there online, it was quite a greasy line. It was behaving well, but it was definitely greasy. But as soon as you move the car off the traditional racing line in the wet, the braking Gs for me felt a lot more, and we were reeling cars in. It was worth experimenting with that, because it gets very polished on the race line, just wear and tear, lap after lap, race after race. And when it's wet, it's much more slippery on a polished surface. Sure. So trying to get a little bit of grip on the rougher tarmac, just slightly offline, I felt actually, you know, proved a benefit. Yep. We were outbraking some pretty decent cars. Some of them actually had some downforce on them. Sure. This isn't an aero car as such. Yep. So you know, the difference between trying to break threshold on the greasy line, where you can just grab a wheel and feel the ABS. Yep. Going offline, I could tread much firmly and modulate the brakes better. Yeah. Which is a good tip anyway, generally. but the car seemed to like that.
Yeah, I agree. It felt insane. Like, it was really impressive actually to see that difference just from changing how you're driving the car as well.
Yeah.
So the main reason we've actually done this piece, and in the rain today, we've sort of aimed for a rainy day, was because from previous videos we've had quite a few comments from people saying, okay, that's great in the dry, but is it now undrivable in the wet? But I think it's safe to say after today, no.
I agree. I mean, to use a word like undrivable is very unfair.
Sure.
Obviously, there's various skills of track driver. If you were constantly in the wet, you might want to slightly change your setup.
Yeah.
But you're not going to go fiddling with the car throughout the season.
Exactly, yeah.
In England track days, 1 minute it's dry, then it's wet.
Yeah.
This is a very drivable car in wet conditions.
Yeah.
I haven't yet driven it in the dry, and I'd love to have a go in it.
Yeah.
Because it's a super setup. I think people shouldn't be too worried. I think the biggest limiting factor now would be if you get to the colder weather and you're going to do track days in the autumn, probably go to Pilot Sport 4S's
I totally agree.
rather than Cup 2. Just give you a little bit more grip in lower temperature, perhaps shift a little bit more water if there's any surface water. So tyre choice can be important.
Yeah, and that's worth pointing out too. We're still on the tyres that we were on at Silverstone, so they're worn Cup 2 tyres, which are basically a dry optimised tyre, so they're known for being quite slippy in the wet anyway. So yeah, definitely, I think even if we are doing more track days in this over winter, we probably will move over to a PS4S just for those reasons to get a bit more grip.
Very drivable, a lot of fun, and we were taking lumps out of some cars we shouldn't have been.
Yeah, we were. Yeah, hopefully that'll be on some of the video we've overlaid already.
You should see some overtakes.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. All right, Gary, thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to talk.
Part of the setup we do on the GT4 does include aero adjustments that are adjustable as standard. So on the GT4 chassis, it is quite limited to air dams at the front of the car. The rear wing position isn't actually adjustable on the GT4. It is on the RS models and on some GT3 models, but not on the GT4. The air dams in the front are effectively two plastic blocks that you can take out from underneath the front bumper, and this opens up venturi ducts in the front splitter to allow the front splitter to engage and work even better. The reason they're in there is, like we've mentioned before, to give an understeer bias in the chassis, so it prevents downforce at the front, which means that there's a bit less grip, and that leads to a more understeer tendency chassis. So we take them out to help get the nose down and increase the grip at the front axle. Another area of modification we've done, which is less obvious, is we've changed the rake angle of the car. So with this car having quite a flat floor underneath, when you alter the rake angle of a car and you effectively have the back higher than the front, you're creating a venturi under the car. So it's a smaller entrance point at the front and a bigger exit point at the back. And the expansion of the air as it travels under the car, uninterrupted with the flat floor, means that it creates downforce effectively via the venturi effect. So with the rake angle set on the car, it's twofold. It's set to a position to optimize the underfloor aero, and it's also set to a position for the actual dynamics of the chassis in terms of getting the nose in and keeping the mass on that front tyre, with it being a mid-engine car as well. So they're the two aero modifications we've made. We will be looking at making more down the line in terms of maybe upgrading the aero profiles to get more functional aero on the car, and this will come into effect in the higher speed corners as well. So aero is more effective when you're going quickly, as you've got more airflow over the spoiler rear wing, and it's having more effect and creating more downforce effectively. So the faster you go, the more downforce you have, which means you can corner at faster paces. In slower corners, you are more reliant upon the actual tyre and geometry aspects and the suspension to get around that corner, because the aero is not as effective at the lower speed corners. So that aero modification that we did on the GT4, by removing those two front plastic dams effectively in the front splitter, you can do that at home very easily. You don't need to set the car up to do that. You can actually get that gain from the chassis within about 5 minutes, literally on your driveway. So they're just held in by two Torx head screws, T25 screws. Just undo those two screws, take the plastic dams out, leave them in your garage, and automatically you've just unlocked more grip at your front axle. So we've had a really fun day today. I've had a lot of fun personally in the car, out in the wet weather conditions as well, putting this setup to the test. So this is the car as we took it away from Silverstone, exactly the same setup that we optimised in the dry there, and we've been driving it in these wet conditions today at the hands of Gary and myself as well, and it has been a lot of fun. We've learned a lot about the chassis, about using the wet line instead of the dry line as well, and also the fact that even with the excessive camber and the part worn Cup 2 tyres that are now on the car, it does still stop very well. We were outbraking a lot of cars out on circuit, even with the amount of camber that we're running on this chassis. In the next few videos, we're going to be taking the upgrades even further. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those updates that are coming very soon.